You're working, George, on this breaking story as we speak. What other facts can we establish beyond what I've mentioned there? Is there anything else that we can definitively pin to this story at the moment?
Well, we know that Yevgeny Prigozhin, who had cut a diminished figure in really recent months following the failed coup attempt, had been in Africa and resurfaced recently. So he released an image of himself sort of talking to troops just earlier this week. It was his sort of first piece to camera that was really his signature that he used to share on his Telegram channels. But it appears his plane then rushed back to Moscow. There are suggestions that perhaps he was being edged out. So the Wagner group had plenty of sort of lucrative business contracts in Africa, but it appeared they might have been being edged out by other figures in the Kremlin. He rushed back to Russia, and it appears he was most probably on this private jet that was flying from Moscow to St. Petersburg when it appears to have crashed, and with all the people on board reportedly dying.
We've seen a tweet from Alicia Cairns, who, as you well know, is a Conservative chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. She talks about a second plane owned by Prigozhin landing successfully at an airport near Moscow. Questions now, she says, whether Prigozhin was on the first plane, as the manifest stated, or on this second jet. If you were him, she says, and you boarded the second plane, would you let anyone know that you'd survived?
Yes, and I think there are members of, some of the remainers of his followers who are sort of clinging to hope of that second plane. It should be noted as well that others, an official who is in sort of occupied Ukraine with close links to the Wagner group has also suggested that he is in fact dead. It's worth noting as well who originally reported it. It was the Russian state news services, TASS, and it has now been reported as well on Russian state television. So, the weight of just judging by the people who have been reporting it and given their closeness to the Kremlin, you would tend to believe them. But yes, there is this second plane, and there is nothing's confirmed. So we have to wait and see how this plays out. I mean, all we can say for certain is that the way in which seemingly Prigozhin has been targeted will be read and understood by Russians very, very clearly.
We know that the UK's Foreign Office has said in a very brief statement they're monitoring the situation closely. What are your lines of investigation this evening, George?
I think, I'm afraid, if you look at the status that the Wagner group had after the aborted coup, they had been moved to Belarus, or the remnants of what consisted of Prigozhin's army had been moved to Belarus. They no longer had the heavy weaponry that they had when they marched on Moscow. Isn't the phrase, something along the lines of, if you're going to shoot at the king, make sure you don't miss? And Prigozhin missed, and as a result, he no longer had the influence on the battlefield or in politics or anything that he had only a few months ago. And it seems that this, it's hasty perhaps already to sort of draw conclusions, but it seems that this is another opportunity of Putin quite demonstratively taking out his rivals, as we've seen with the murder of Boris Nemtsov in the heart of Moscow, as we saw with the attempted assassination of Alexei Navalny on a flight from Siberia. These are acts that are, it's demonstrative as much as anything else. It's showing the Russian public these are the consequences of action.
Yeah, his former prominent commander, Sergei Surovkin, has also not been seen since June, I think. He's reported to be under house arrest, but no one can quite confirm that, and that is another strand to this as well. What is notable about Prigozhin, George? If we talk about who is Prigozhin, what sort of jumps out to you from what you know of his history? Because he was in jail, wasn't he? He was a criminal. He was known as an extremely aggressive operator.
I think that's a key part of his identity. You know, there's a strong Russian sort of penal culture that develops from the end of the Soviet period, which is all about loyalty. It's about living almost like a gangster, which is the way that Putin has ruled Russia, and so Prigozhin fit into that. But their history goes back to St. Petersburg. I mean, Prigozhin, after he came out of jail, he was basically a petty criminal. He became a restaurateur, initially a hot dog seller. Then he ran a restaurant that Putin used to frequent in St. Petersburg, which is where Putin is also from. He won lucrative catering contracts from the Kremlin from that. And it was only later that he became the sort of mercenary that he is most famous for being now.